The purpose of this PowerPoint is to help students learn to develop argumentative paragraphs for tests like the American History AP exam. And this assignment is just one on an argumentative paragraph on Andrew Jackson. And again, the idea is to learn to incorporate the argument with the specific factual information and to add in some commentary for effects in the future. So the prompt is, was Andrew Jackson a states' rights advocate for the common people in regards to the Nullification Crisis, or a president who overstepped his power in regards to legitimate state issues? So the student is being asked to write on one topic, which is not normally the case with an AP American History exam. Usually they ask you in an essay to write on more than one topic, but this one's a little bit simplified just for the purposes of writing a paragraph. And it asks the student to take a stand after thinking about the issue and then in regards to the nullification crisis. The first thing that I tell students to be sure they do at the very beginning is to have an assertion or a mini thesis in the topic sentence that states their position. They need to flush out and write out specific factual information on the nullification crisis and how Jackson's actions were perceived by the common people. Commentary. Effects then and in the future. And these commentary statements may also blend in with the specific factual information. They don't necessarily come at the end. And one of the future issues that we want students to talk about a little bit in regards to nullification is the future secession crisis, which will come in 1860, because South Carolina threatened to secede from the Union during the nullification crisis. So what I'm going to do now is go through some of the information that students can use in this paragraph. And this is a list of the big events regarding the tariff, some background on the tariff, why it's being passed, who it actually helps, who it actually hurts. So students should jump into their topic after stating their assertion, whether or not they say that Andrew Jackson stayed true to his states' rights advocate position, or whether or not he overstepped his power, or perhaps he did some of both. First thing that they should do is begin to talk about the history of the tariff and why it's even invoked. So the tariffs were first introduced after the War of 1812, and the purpose is to protect factory goods from competition of British goods. American wanted to put a tax on goods to make the British goods more expensive so that a person would buy the cheaper American good and thus American business would grow. Wool manufacturers had advocated for a higher and higher tariff over the years, and this had caused the tariff to slowly creep up and become even higher, so that by 1828 the tariff was very expensive. It was very high. And it was so high that it would receive the nicknames the Tariff of the Abominations, or Tariff of Abominations, or the Black Tariff, for the Tariff of 1828. Southerners were hurt by this tariff because it didn't help them sell cotton on the world market. It made products that they bought from Britain very expensive because Southerners tend to trade a lot more with Britain and France than they buy goods from the North. Roads are still very poor, and Southerners are not able to gain those cheaper American goods as easily because there are few factories in the South. So they've got to travel anyway to buy the American good, or the American good has to be brought to them, and this will increase the price too. So either way, Southerners, due to this tariff of abominations, are paying higher for British goods, and they're also paying a little more for the American good, even if they can get it, because they have to pay the cost of transportation. So, after the Tariff of Abominations is passed, with little regard to the issues of Southern trade and Southern buying power, Southerners worried about the federal government also stepping in and changing laws on slavery without regard to Southern concerns. John C. Calhoun then decides to step into the limelight, so to speak, or step in and speak out on behalf of the South and he writes a document called the South Carolina Exposition and Protest. And he does so anonymously because he's the vice president of Andrew Jackson. And he does ask for the South Carolina legislature to meet and to nullify the tariff. He states that his argument is based on Thomas Jefferson and James Madison's Virginia and Kentucky resolutions that also called for nullification of the Alien and Sedition Acts and argued for the states' rights theory of government, in that some states have very important needs and that sometimes federal laws encroach upon those needs, and states have every right to nullify federal laws that damage the states. So John C. Calhoun writes this up in his South Carolina Exposition and Protest. Meanwhile, Congress does meet again and pass a new lesser tariff, realizing that there is an issue with this tariff of 1828, but it takes a while. It's the tariff of 1832. It's lessened a little bit, but South Carolina was still not happy with that lesser tariff. The nullification crisis continues, and the South Carolina meets, and 2/3 of the people who meet in the legislature are considered nullies, and these are people who want to nullify the tariff. They hold a state convention, and South Carolina declares the existing tariff of 1832 null and void, and even threatens to secede from the Union. Southerners at this point are feeling so strongly about this high tariff. They had legitimate economic issues of higher prices and potential loss of trade. Jackson, however, thought these issues were secondary to a challenge to his authority and to keeping the Union together. Northerners are feeling good about the tariff because their industries are being protected and they feel like their needs are being met. So they have no issues at the state level with the tariff. It is just the Southerners who have issues with this tariff, and they are upset about their loss of money and loss of trade. They are legitimate issues. Andrew Jackson, though, is worried about maintaining control, maintaining his power, and he dispatches a military force to South Carolina. He then asks Congress for a force bill to give him the power to use the military to enforce the tariff, and also asks for a lowered tariff to try and de-escalate the situation. Henry Clay, also known as the Great Compromiser, then steps in, and he does suggest reducing the tariff by 10% over 8 years, and he works very hard in Congress to get this compromise bill through. The compromise tariff of 1833 was passed, but a force bill was also passed with it. South Carolina then, at their Columbian Convention, repealed their nullification ordinance due to the compromise tariff. Jackson had preserved the Union, even if it was through a show of force, bordering on an abuse of power. He did call out the U.S. military on his own countrymen, but he did so because saving the Union was paramount. But Andrew Jackson was also the type of president who was not going to be disobeyed by his states. He was going to maintain his authority and be perceived as a very strong leader, and this is why he got the nickname King Andrew. When he got ready to do something, he did it, and he did not let anything or anyone stand in his way. For future situations, in 1860, President Lincoln would also face the same choices as Jackson. When South Carolina does secede from the Union, and they are followed by 4 states very quickly. But Lincoln chose not to act forcefully. Unlike Jackson, he wanted to convey a message of help, not attack. At first, he appealed to the states who had left, and he did send supplies to the fort at Fort Sumter in the hope that eventually a compromise or an agreement, something could be worked out to preserve the Union. However, South Carolinians and other Southerners had taken lessons from the nullification crisis. They were now willing to fight to protect their interests if no one in Congress did. South Carolinians did not forget this point in history when Andrew Jackson, the president, called out the military and threatened to attack them if they seceded from the Union. And this time they were prepared to go to war, just like Jackson was in 1832. So sometimes in history, it's hard for us to remember that future events are sometimes affected by past events. And perhaps if Andrew Jackson had not put forth such a show of force by sending the military to South Carolina, and perhaps if he would have just asked for the compromise bill or asked for a reduced tariff, then perhaps South Carolinians and Southerners would not have felt threatened by the federal government and also felt that their interests were being ignored by Northern legislators, and perhaps the history of the Civil War would have been rewritten.